Good afternoon. So sorry for this technical problems. It is a pleasure to be here today to see some friends and colleagues again, and to discuss both the proposed project and the ways forward. I would like to greet our advisors and thank them for being with us today and for their important contributions. In my short presentation, I will, on the one hand, talk about the proposed empirical work we presented in Working Package 4, launching some questions about the next steps in our research. So this task was constructed in a very flexible way. So we have conditions to think some aspects of this working package. Since the project was thought and submitted some years ago, we think it is important, as Carl and Rosa said, to take some time to reflect on the concepts that are central to the project and to this task. Our proposal starts from previous empirical and theoretical work carried out by the team and crossed the topics of cinema, memory, identity representations, reception studies about with young people, and migrations, racism, and intercultural relations. But I will return later to some of the empirical work that we have done. But first, I will focus on the proposal we put forward for funding. We proposed to analyze Portuguese diasporic cinema, and we have to think about this conceptualization. What is diasporic cinema, or diasporic films, diasporic filmmakers, or the colonial cinema? So we have to do this problematization, theoretical problematization. The first step in this working package is the articulation, of course, with the working package 5, that will be precisely to reflect on the concept of these diasporic filmmakers. For example, Bergman and Stenberg define and distinguish diasporic filmmakers from migrant filmmakers, and he defined diasporic filmmakers as descendants of immigrants born and raised in a diasporic environment and who do not have or have only a remote experience of the migration process. They are, however, connected with their family's migration process and history of relocation or dispersal through kinship networks, family narratives, cultural practices, language artifacts, etc. However, we are aware that the conceptualization still requires further in-depth analysis, crossing with other concepts central to the project. We want to explore the film production of artists with a migratory and diasporic background, reflect on the collective production of minority groups, collectives, or social movements, and carry a critical review of these films, forms, and languages. We also aim to explore new film production and distribution schemes and the question of authorship and circulation of collective films by activist groups and by migrant associations, for example. And finally, we propose to look at the content of films and specific modes of filming, interpretation, and viewing. As you can see, our proposal is quite ambitious in this working package also, and raises several questions. How do contemporary Portuguese short films present and represent spaces, migrant subjectivities, and experience of belonging and displacement? What is their potential to mobilize alternative understandings of belonging? What is how and what imaginaries do they create of everyday life, lived experiences and subjects experiences in the diaspora? And finally, how do these films evoke issues of migration, identity, and memory? But how do you propose to do this? So it's not an easy task. We decided that we'll study the last Portuguese short films produced between 2018 and 2022, but also independent productions and co-productions, sometimes without public funding or formal schemes of film production, circulation, and distribution. We also say and find that we will select a corpus of short films for an in-depth analysis. Concerning our milestones, we will organize an activist meeting and produce a short film, as Kitty already said, about migrant activisms. And now, in some way, is starting from the thematic proposal of this seminar, I will now speak of some possibilities and open paths that we can discuss as a team today and tomorrow also. In short, besides the reflection around the central concepts for this project and for this working package in particular, the team has been talking about the need to carry out a mapping of Portuguese short films made with the different public funding and with alternative forms of funding. We have selected and organized a database of the films funded by the Portuguese main, the Instituto de Cinema e de Audiovisual, that's Portuguese institution. You can find also some films without funding, public funding, in film festivals and film shows, and we want also to analyze some of these materials. From this for this mapping and for the selection of the films to be analyzed, it is essential to examine the work already carried out by the team and by other projects and researchers. So, and finally, we will need to construct a multidisciplinary and multi-method analytical framework that is suitable for a deep understanding of selected short films. These are some of the works already done by the team that are important to this working package, but some of them, because there are a lot more, the Journal of Comunicação e Sociedade that was recently published and coordinated by Sheila Khan and Vitor Souza and Pedro Chat, is also important for our reflection. The book of Rosa Cabecinhas and Ana Cristina Pereira about with interviews with Mozambican filmmakers is also central to our reflection in this project. And also, of course, the book organized by Michel Salles and interviews conducted with Afro-descendants filmmakers, the mapping of films funded by a particular ICA action that the ICA has a policy to fund films produced with the Portuguese speaking countries. And it will be interesting also to see what films they produce and are funding. And also we need to also the work, the thesis of Ana Cristina Pereira and other works that seem important to this this working package. One path we have followed was the collection of the data about funded short films, whose information can be found in the annual catalogs of ICA, the Instituto de Cinema e de Audiovisual, from 2018 to 2022. We have already did this collection of these materials, but another source of information that seems important is the Portuguese Short Film Agency platform, which develops a work of promotion and distribution of Portuguese short films and has the goal of increasing the circulation of Portuguese short films in Portugal and abroad. Here you can find funded films and films produced with other resources. And those films also, we can find here those film statistics, information about spectators, festival selections, exhibitions, awards, among other informations. The proliferation of film festivals in Portugal and their growing importance for cultural, social, and political configuration process is a key issue in contemporary Portuguese cinema. In this circuit, we can find funded films, but also those produced with alternative forms of funding or by students of cinema schools, for example. There are several film festivals and shows in Portugal, and some of them carry out by associations and activist and collectives and groups. At this point, we have collected data about some of these initiatives. These are some of them. We have a lot of more of film festivals and shows in Portugal. And we have, as you can see, for example, those festivals that are focused on short films, those that are organized by collectives as MICAR, and is organized by an association or the SOS Racismo. Those that are itinerant, so film festivals that occur in Portugal, but also in other countries of Portuguese language. So we have some choices and some work to do in selecting the festivals or festivals programming that we want to focus in. Here you can find, these are some examples of short films that we came across in a previous look that lead us to think about the criteria for the selection of films festivals to be analyzed. But I believe that tomorrow we will have, and maybe today, the opportunity to talk a bit more about this subject. So this was the proposal funding for a working package. We point out some possibilities and paths that are open, and so at the same time some challenges. So these are questions that I left. Okay, we define that we will analyze funded films and film festivals programming, but which film festivals? We all organize short film festivals, or maybe we should define diversity, as Carla mentioned earlier, diversity of film festivals, considering is, for example, Porto Pós-Doc, India Lisboa are important film festivals, but are in the central area, in the littoral of Portugal. Maybe it will be interesting to look at other film festivals as Não Açores, and those that are in here. We can cross with the task that Kitty presented, with those films that are produced with alternative forms by associations, collectives that are important to this project also. Should we take in account the number of spectators, selections in film festivals, screenings hours, or not? Should we also take in consideration the diversity of authorship, styles, and themes? So these are some of our questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabel Macedo, for introducing the task 4. And then I ask Tristan Mattelart to give a comment, or to do provocations, to do questions. You have, so it's an honor to have your participation today. Tristan Mattelart is a professor and researcher at the University of Paris 2, and is a researcher at Charisme, Centre d'analyse et de recherche interdisciplinaire sur les médias. Je crois qu'il peut nous aider beaucoup, alors merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. It's a pleasure being here, and sorry for being online and not with you physically today. And thank you to Rosa for having invited me to this very interesting event. And thanks to Carla, Anna Cristina, and Isabel for their presentations. So it's difficult to make some comments on these presentations. First of all, I think I have to stress the importance of the project that is carried out. If I understand well, your project is going to fill a void in the literature on media, cinema, arts, activism, and migratory movements in Portugal, and that's a very, very important point. I would love to see this kind of projects carried out in France, and that is one of my first, and it's maybe the main important point here. After that, I have some comments. You raised a lot of questions. I do not have answers, of course, but I have some comments on what you say. First comment is the fact that you presented 3 different tasks, and you each presented a task. And hearing you, what was quite clear after hearing you your 3 presentations, what was quite clear is that there were a lot of transversal issues, and I think that this raises a problem of organization for your study. How are you going to cope with these transversal issues? Because the interest of your study lies in the fact that you study what I like that very much, what you call the symbolic bordering processes. But you study these symbolic bordering processes in a very original way, because you study how some alternative media, some filmmakers, some art activists are going to deconstruct these symbolic bordering processes. And of course, you have a lot of overlapping issues, because you have different actors, but you maybe have the same tactics, the same strategies from the part of these actors who try to deborder the representations of migration and so on. So I would have maybe a practical question. A first practical question: how are you going to cope with that? You should avoid making the work 3 times and then discovering that you made this theoretical framework 3 times, because you have the same big questions here. That's one point. The second point is that I had the feeling that you are interested above all on representations. And so the text, the media text, and the media text can be also the cinema texts, of course. But well, I do not belong to this kind of approach. I think it's very important to pay attention to the representation, to the representations, the media representations, symbolic representations, to the contents, of course. That's a key point. But, you know, there are also I think that in these issues, it's also important to pay attention to so how to say that in English, to the production side of these issues. How do you produce these alternative media or activist media? Because you raised the question. How do you produce these short films? how do you give the means to these filmmakers with migrant or diaspora background? How do you give the means to these filmmakers to produce such or such short film, and how do you produce art, and where do you distribute art? It's important because it has an influence. These conditions, these production constraints have consequences on what you can say, on the kind of content you can have on the media, and this has consequences also on the capacity of the alternative media, the alternative filmmaking or whatever, to stick to the counter discourse agenda that you all stressed. No? So that's an important point. The economics, I would say. No? That's the economy, stupid, say the other. Huh? So the economy is always quite important. Isabel told us about the public funding about short films, and that reminded me that the regulatory frameworks also are important. They allow some public funding for the short films, for the distribution maybe also, not only the production. In France, you have public funding for some alternative media. Is there any regulatory measure in Portugal that could aid, that could help the alternative media? It's an important issue. And then you know, it's not because you are alternative that you are a good media. No? Because you have this financing problem, and it is a big problem. But after that, the story of the history of the alternative media is full with alternative media where there were a lot of power relations inside, I mean. And so these also need to be studied, in my opinion. Yeah? If I take the history of the radios that were created by the people with a Maghrebi background in France at the beginning of the 80s, a very old history. This story is full of struggles within the Maghrebi community for taking the control of one or two of these radios and negotiating with the state, and this is very important. You have to be cautious. To be cautious against the risk of romanticizing the alternative media. Take care. The history of these media is not so romantic. It's full of very tricky realities. That's an important point. And two more points on that. It's the transnational dimension. The transnational dimension is important. You have here, by definition, people who are transnational, and so how the transnational is incorporated in these media. So I think that this, you will see it in the representations given in the media. No problem for that. But do the countries of origin I don't know, somebody talked about Brazilian, Agora Brazil, alternative media. So do the people in Brazil or some institutions in Brazil have, for example, an important role in collaborating in this kind of media in Portugal? I don't know. But you have something that is potentially very transnational. So this dimension has to be kept in mind. And then you have the issue, the big issue of the publics. To what publics are aimed these media or these films? You know, because Isabel quoted the festivals. You know that the festivals, well, at least the big festivals very often are not followed by the poor people that could be the main public for this kind of films. The festivals are populated with people from the cosmopolitan elite, and maybe it's not the privileged, disprivileged public that is aimed at. So so these are some points. 2 or 3 other points. Another important point is that of the decolonial. This is a very important category that you used, and so here we are in a theoretical ground. Theory, in my opinion, theory must help us to think the realities we are studying. Yeah? And the decolonial issue is a quite complicated issue a quite complicated notion when it is used with this kind of subjects. Well, in my opinion, but maybe I will be very heavily criticized saying that, and I would understand, of course. But in my opinion, decolonial, you know, the decolonial notion is a very macro issue. It's a very macro issue, and it's not so easy to handle. And for these issues that are immersed in the ordinary life of people, I don't know if you can. Well, of course you can use it, but I think that you would need to have some help from other notions, because the decolonial puts the stress on you know, the heritage of the colonial history and so on. So that's a very important point. But here you deal with local realities, with local struggles, with other kinds of domination, and I think that you need other notions to describe that. Something that struck me was that you never mentioned the class relations, for example, colonial, but okay, but now you have also these class relations. The minorities you are speaking of do not belong all to the same class, social classes, you know? And this has to be taken into account. There's a difference between the how do you call that, the Afro-Brazilian youth who are students, and the Roma people. I'm sure that if you make a sociology of these publics, potential publics, you will have very different class situations. So I think that beware with the decolonial, because it's a very macro thing, and you have to pay attention to micro situations also. No? So that's one point. And for example, I can illustrate that with the something that when you study the media, the minority media, alternative media, activist media, you have also to take to consider the realities of the relations of power within the newsrooms of these alternative media. Because in these media also you will have power and domination, and that's important. And the decolonial here is not very useful for understanding that, except if some white, some men white dominate, of course, also these alternative and activist media. But you need other tools. I think that the decolonial here is not sufficient. And the other and the last, because I am too long. The last point, there is a point that is not so clear for me. It's the objective of your study. I think that you have at least two objectives, and maybe the two objectives are not so. Maybe there is some contradiction here, but maybe not. Huh? One, in some of your presentations, I had the feeling that the objective was to study how these alternative media, how these filmmakers, or how these art activists created counter-public spheres. Okay, so and Fraser was quoted for that, but some of you also said that you wanted to measure the capacity of this media or of these films or of these artists to influence the general agenda, the general agenda. So it means not a counter public sphere, but the more mainstream public sphere. And here, so you have maybe here you have to clarify what your objective is. Do you want to see how they can build a counter public sphere, or do you want to see how they can contribute to a rejuvenation, or they can influence the general agenda, and so the more mainstream public sphere. So the problem is that with your methodologies, I think you will not be able. You will not be able, and it's, for me, it's not a problem. Huh? You will not be able to measure the effects of this on the general public sphere, because for that you would need to study the mainstream media, how the mainstream media are emulated by how the mainstream media are emulated. I think that it will be that you will not really be able to do that, because for doing that you would need to have more other kinds of methodologies, and you have so much work already with your contra-public spheres, the building of these contra-public spheres, that I would choose to stick to that issue. That is already a very important and fascinating issue, and I am very happy to have been able to hear your presentations and to read, because I must admit that I had read also the proposal before arriving here. Thanks, and sorry for being too long.